Why should we care about firmware? Well, firmware is everywhere. You might think that your device is running Android or Windows or iOS with some apps on top of it, but there's a lot more to your devices than just the OS. The OS runs on the AP in your device. AP stands for Application Processor. The AP is inside the Intel or AMD chip in a Windows PC. It's inside the main chip in an Apple A17 or M2 chip used in phones and laptops. The AP is the thing that makes your device run fast and ensures that it's responsive when you tap the screen or click the mouse. When we think about firmware, we're often talking about the AP firmware, the firmware in this application processor. This is the BIOS in a Windows computer, but there are many other processing pieces in your device. The Wi-Fi has its own processor dedicated to sending and receiving data wirelessly at high speed. The graphics system has its own processor which deals with 2D and 3D graphics. Most modern devices have an audio processor to make the sound better, or to deal with multiple microphones. Laptop PCs have an EC which handles the keyboard, battery, power, and there's often a security processor to check what software is loaded and running. Each of these processors has firmware too. None of these processors is running the OS itself. They each have their own mini version of some other OS, typically something small and simple like Zephyr or FreeRTOS. In fact, in a modern phone or computer, the main OS is only running on a small subset, perhaps 30% of the main chip. The rest of it is running something else. Like I said at the start, firmware is everywhere. So what? Well, in many ways, the firmware has more control over your device than the apps and the OS that run on it. All of the data you can send over Wi-Fi can be inspected by the Wi-Fi firmware. Everything on the screen can be inspected by the graphics firmware. The audio processor can listen to everything you say. The EC can monitor everything you type. On top of that, the AP I mentioned before controls how the OS accesses the system hardware. In many cases, it can monitor everything that's going on. So the security and reliability of the firmware is critical to the device. The potential for security holes, backdoors, and malicious firmware is enormous. Even if you trust your OS, can you trust your firmware? This firmware problem is becoming more and more challenging because computer systems are becoming more and more complex with more and more pieces of firmware. You wouldn't use an operating system you don't trust, but do you even know what firmware is in your phone, computer, or internet router? Firmware is very important, and we should care about it every bit as much as the OS itself.